Hey guys, right, today we are back with another Armchair Historian video. This time, what made the American Civil War so deadly? Animated history. Well, I like to argue, and I think I've been arguing this for a few years now, ever since I started college. Fucking almost 4 whole years ago. And no, I think I started arguing this when I was in high school. Um, but I would say that the American Civil War was the first modern war. It was where you saw the first implementation of weapons that would make World War One so deadly. Um, and in the North, at the very least, you saw pretty much the complete mobilization of the entire economy, mass production of weaponry, um, large scale numbers, overwhelming numbers to break down the South, because the South didn't have access to the manpower that the North had. Or, well, they did, but they weren't about to give their slaves any guns, for obvious reasons. So, yeah. But I think it's mainly, there was also disease, but disease was common. But I think disease really hit pretty hard in the American Civil War. I can't remember what the numbers are. I know that roughly 600,000 Americans died in the American Civil War, which would be, I think, putting that in today's numbers would be like 6 million Americans dead. Would it be more? It was like, I think it was 3% of the total US population at the time, which, was a lot. Would that be 3 million then today, because US population's like 300 something million? I don't know. It was a deadly war. Let's go ahead and learn what Armchair Historian says.
If someone were to ask you, what is the costliest war in American history, how would you answer? Many
Civil
would
War.
impulsively respond with the Second World War, or even Vietnam. However,
Which is reasonable. Modern television definitely makes the painting, at least with World War II. And also, when you hear World War II, it's World War II. We know about the deaths, the amount of Jews that were slaughtered. We know the amount of Russians, and we know the treatment the Japanese did to the Japanese. We hear about the deaths alone brought about by 2 atomic bombs, and then the lesser known fire bombings, which killed more than the atomic bombs. So really, even to my brain, like, you just hear and you put in context with the other information that you know, like, the whole world is fighting. Surely that means America also suffered more deaths than any other war that they had. That's what everyone else pretty much had, except for the French. I think the French most deadly war is their the stuff involving the Huguenots, however you pronounce it. I think that's what it was, when they were having religious issues. England, I think it would also be World War II, or it's the English Civil War. I can't remember. Russia, it's World War II. Poland, it's World War II. Germany, it's actually, I think, the 30 Years' War. Because that was just devastating for the German area. China, I think it's also still China. It actually might be the Civil War between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. I can't remember. Or it's World War II. Japan, it's World War II, I think. But yeah, you hear all those nations, all these nations. I'd understand if someone said World War II. And it was fairly close, right? Like, what, 400,000 Americans died in World War II? So, like, 200,000 is still a big difference, but in terms of amount of dead in wars, not too big of a difference.
However, this is simply untrue. The American Civil War was and still is the costliest conflict in American history. In fact, up until about 50 years ago, the casualties of the Civil War were higher than any other American wars combined. But why was this the case?
I didn't know that. Or maybe I've been told that, but I forgot.
Few automatic weapons, no tanks or high explosives. I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian, and today we're going to be examining what exactly made the American Civil War so lethal.
Well, funnily enough, I think the invention of tanks actually helped make war a little less costly because, yes, you can surround an enemy and slaughter them. However, what's going to happen a lot of the time when an enemy is completely surrounded and they know they are surrounded, they are just going to surrender, which, lessens casualties because, they are surrendering. They're not dying.
First, it must be understood that far more men died of sickness than combat.
Okay.
Approximately 67% of all Civil War casualties were...
60%? I didn't think it was going to be that high. I was going to think maybe 50 to 55%.
...were the result of infectious diseases such as measles, dysentery, and smallpox. This was the natural result of assembling so many men from different areas in one location, and was exacerbated by the lack of sanitation and fresh water. The loss of men to disease had significant implications on the battlefield. For example, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, 5,000 Confederate soldiers were rendered unfit for duty due to smallpox contamination. That said, disease will inevitably cause casualties in any war. However, combat in the American Civil War was still exceptionally deadly, and this was for a variety of reasons. The first reason why combat was so deadly was the extensive use of what is perhaps the most infamous munitions of the war, the Menet ball, which was named after its inventor, the French army officer Claude-Etienne Menet. Before its invention, rifles, which were loaded with musket balls, were very slow to reload, as their ammunition had to fit tightly into the barrel to accommodate the rifling. Menet solved this problem by designing a hollow, conical bullet which fit loosely in the barrel. When the rifle was fired, the hollow cavity in the projectile expanded, allowing the round to fit firmly against the rifling, giving it a spin, which drastically increased accuracy and reload speed. However,
and also, it's just pure speed in the air.
The round itself was slow and heavy and could cause...
Oh, never mind. Guess it was still slow.
...cause immense damage to the body. Bones that were hit generally shattered, necessitating the amputation of limbs in many cases. But rifled muskets weren't the only thing that increased battlefield casualties. The most formidable weapon in the arsenals of both sides was, of course, field artillery, which was invaluable on the 19th century battlefield. Improvements in weapon technology resulted in artillery being both deadlier and more accurate than ever before. Explosive shells were able to destroy entire platoons if a direct hit occurred, and the introduction of rifled artillery, such as the Parrott gun, made such hits much more likely. According to eyewitness Sergeant Jonathan Stowe, 15th Massachusetts Infantry,
"What sights I've seen that I now see around me. Shells fly past me every few seconds, carrying away branches from trees and scattering limbs around. I'm in severe pain. Furious how the shells fly. I do sincerely hope that I shall not be wounded again."
By far, the factor most responsible for producing casualties in combat, however, was the employment of linear tactics. As can be guessed, such accurate and deadly weapons were devastating to the static formations that were employed on the Civil War battlefield. Most of the commanders of the war had been trained at the United States Military Academy at West Point. In fact, at least one army at every major battle that was fought during the war was commanded by a West Point graduate, including such commanders as Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee.
Traitor.
As the doctrine taught at West Point emphasized Napoleonic-era direct approach tactics, it's no surprise that both sides deployed their forces in lines, and it is equally unsurprising that both sides suffered heavy casualties as a result. It did not help that many of the generals appointed during the war had no prior military experience and were promoted due to their political positions. However, it must be understood that there was no better way to fight in open ground at the time. In battles where cover could be used, commanders usually deployed their men behind it. For example, at the Battle of Antietam, 500 Confederates hidden behind trees and walls were able to delay the advance of several Union brigades attempting to cross what would later be named Burnside's Bridge. The quintessential example of the lethality of Civil War combat is the infamous advance at the Battle of Gettysburg ordered by Robert E. Lee, known as Pickett's Charge. During the assault, 12,500 Confederate infantrymen advanced 1 mile across an open field under very heavy Union rifle and artillery fire. Although some Confederates reached Union lines, the assault was ultimately repulsed, with the Confederates taking over 6,000 casualties. The range and accuracy of rifle
that's a
muskets
lot.
ensured that Lee's men would begin suffering heavily well before they reached northern lines, and even before it began, the Confederates were being subjected to extensive Union bombardment. Artillery played such a considerable role in the Civil War that, according to Craig Simmons in his book The Battle of Gettysburg, the artillery barrages at Gettysburg may well have been the loudest man-made sound on the North American continent until the detonation of the first atomic bomb.
Damn.
And in the words of Colonel Joseph Mayo of the 3rd Virginia Infantry who fought at Gettysburg,
The first shot or two flew harmlessly over our heads, but soon they began to get the range, and then came pandemonium. First, there was an explosion on the top of
Emperor
the tree.
Tiger
and
starts
then
trying
there
a
was
southern
another fall by
accent.
Hiss and shriek. 2 men were killed
I
outright.
can't do an
They were
accent
frightfully
either. I
wounded.
suck at my
Company F had
accents.
suffered terribly, and a lieutenant had his leg shattered below the knee.
Ooh.
towards
Shattered
the end
legs
of
of
the
ugh.
war, the deadliness of combat on open fields was finally recognized by commanders of both sides. Accordingly, both the North and South began to employ static defensive positions and breastworks, as can be seen at the Siege of
Trench
Petersburg,
warfare.
which was also one of the first times that the Gatling gun was employed in battle,
Yep.
but in a very limited capacity. When the First World War arrived 50 years later, the American Civil War was finally seen as both foreshadowing trench warfare and representing the transition from close
I said that at the beginning of the video. I said that, kind
order
of.
formations in open ground to open order formations in cover. This lesson, however, came at the cost of 620,000 American lives. 8% of American males lost their lives in the American
Hold it. 8% of American men. I don't know what that math would be. I guess that would be 4% of the total population if we say population is split directly evenly. 50-50. So 4%. I don't know the
Civil
math.
War, and 1 in 4 soldiers would never return home.
1 in 4. Damn.
If you want to learn more about the American Civil War, namely why it was fought and how it was fought, I highly recommend you watch Professor Gary Gallagher's lecture on the entire American Civil War.
Let's see here. Let's have this be the final image that we look at. So yeah, pretty much what I said at the beginning of the video is what made the American Civil War so deadly. Disease definitely plays a role. You know, you have so many people together, and they have to move at certain speeds during warfare. You know, you can't, especially at this time, you can't really be all that clean. So, disease is going to come, especially with so many different people from so many different areas mixing together in a localized region, area. So, yeah, that's not good for health. And then you also have the invention of new technology, as Armchair Historian said. So, yeah. That is what made the American Civil War so deadly. Animated history by Armchair Historian. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.